When a lean manufacturing team fails, most leaders think the team just didn't follow the process. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is that too many Kaizen events are led with the certainty instead of curiosity. And that's why you keep wasting time, frustrating people, and missing the results you're after. And today, we're with Dr. Debra Clary, author of the award-winning The Curiosity Curve, and we're going to show you what it actually makes continuous improvement work. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it took 7 years to get you on here, Deb.
Here we go. We're ready to roll today.
We are, yeah, and I've seen you speak, and our recent winner of the Kentucky Storytelling Competition, and congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
And I can see you're someone that's put a lot of work into this. I appreciate what it takes to get a PhD in leadership development. I can't say I totally appreciate it because I haven't done it. So it's one of those things of like, wow. And, we've talked so much on this podcast about curiosity. When I read your book, it's like, oh, wow, it's like she's speaking to manufacturing leaders. But you actually kind of started in manufacturing at Frito-Lay.
hmm I
And
did.
and what when you're let's tell us right, let's jump in. What was your first experience where you kind of thought, hey, this curiosity came in early in your career?
Yes. So I have an interesting beginning to my career in that I went to undergraduate, then I went to business school, and fresh out of business school, I was on my way to my first professional interview at Frito-Lay. I was going to be a manager at the age of 23. I was just so excited. And I went to the warehouse, had an interview, and they did offer me a job, but it wasn't a manager role. It was a Frito-Lay route driver in the city of Detroit. I was a Teamster Local 337. And at that time, Frito Lay started everybody on the truck because they felt like if you're really going to grow with this organization, you've got to know the business from the ground up. And so, 4 a.m., loading the route truck, going to my stores, putting chips on the shelves. That whole experience, that truck became my classroom. It's where I learned how to manage a P&L. I learned how to manage my time. I learned how to build relationships with store managers. And it just gave me an incredible foundation for really understanding, the product is made in the plant and then it is loaded and shipped to a warehouse and then I pick it up and then I put it on my truck. I take it to a store and then the consumers gets to taste this amazing product. And it really helped me understand the importance of that workflow, if you will. And then in about a year after that, I actually worked at the plant. So I did become a manager, and the smell of those chips being made and watching the workers make them, bag them, put them in boxes gave me an incredible appreciation for all the work that goes into getting consumers products.
Yeah, and I've talked to manufacturing leaders that don't have as much operational experience as kind of like, well, I'm commercial. Why do I need to be involved in operations? And I think you just answered that question in a story. You showed us, you didn't tell us. That's why. It's just different. Like the smell of the manufacturing process, especially in food. I'm used to automotive more, not as good. But yeah, just having that boots on the ground essence of that. And so then you did progress in your career there. And then for us manufacturing leaders, how many parts did we make the last hour? How many parts did we make in the last day, right? And there's always pressure on us. So when it comes to continuous improvement and Kaizen events, I've seen some executives sit in a boardroom or just engineers and try to figure out how to save money or find a better design or a different product. And very early on in your career, you didn't call it a Kaizen event, I don't think, but you ran something similar to that.
So are you talking about when Frito-Lay came out with a new product line?
Yeah, and you pulled the drivers in.
I
Who was
did.
pulling the drivers in at that time, Deb?
Yes. I mean, it was kind of unheard of, to consult with drivers. The strategy comes down from corporate, and then we just execute on that. And having spent time on that route truck, having spent time being a Teamster, I understood the value of the voice of the route drivers. And what the story is that corporate Frito-Lay were rolling out a new product line, and it was sweet products. So as opposed to salty snacks, they're now going into grandma cookies. So these are sweet, treats, if you will. And they're very different than a salty snack in the sense of how they're packaged and how heavy they are. And
Mhm.
so I knew that this would be a challenge. And Detroit had been selected to be the market that we rolled these out first. It was the test market. And I'm like, this is going to be tough. So I called in the top 10 or so most influential drivers, those that had the voice of the rest of the union. And so I sat them down. I said, I know you've heard rumblings, but Frito-Lay is coming out with this new line, and I want to talk to you about that. And I said, why will this not work? And so I had white, wallpaper chart paper, and I started writing down everything they said, why it wouldn't work. No room on the truck, you know, it's going to take more time. And just on and I wrote them all down, and they could see them on the wall. And I said, I agree with you. Now, how could we overcome that? If we wanted to, what would we do to make this better? And they started then slow at first, and then they started coming up with ideas. And I took their ideas back to corporate and said, here's what we need for a successful rollout. We need to redesign the inside of the truck with racks that can carry the products. I gave them all the ideas. We rolled out a very successful campaign, and over the next couple of years, we became the highest route average for grandma cookies in the country. And it came down to this sense of the people that have most the information are least consulted. So the drivers they know what it's going to take. And so why not consult with them? And so it built trust between me and them. And then we did a phenomenal job for the organization.
And it's 2 hours from where I grew up, and the Detroit Red Wings, Detroit's very dear to me. And so it's just exciting to see the grandma's cookies were rolled out in the D, and it's
Yes.
just all kind of meant to be an impact to the rest of your life, right? Like just what you learned in that, even that first year, and then getting those 10 route drivers in the room. And it's like, whoa, she's going to start with like letting us just tell us why it won't work. Oh, now now she's asking us what would make it work. And I like what you said, if we wanted it to.
Because this is like, let's explore what's possible here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great lesson, and it also was a lesson in, right, how do you lead people, but it was also a lesson in how do you be a parent, because I went on to have two children, and it helped me think differently about when they had to do something. I would ask for their input. Look, we need to get dressed for school. In the mornings are really rough around here. How could we make this easier for you and for me? And allowing them to have input. Like, well, maybe we could agree on what I'm going to wear the night before. Oh, that's a really good idea. And then that way, when you first get up, all you have to do is put the clothes on. And it's so powerful in terms of asking other people. Part of this exercise was you wrote down the people in your life and how you might love them more, right? Because we're all talking about how do we create more love. And I wrote it all down. I scribbled it all off. Well, I did not know we were getting into small groups to talk about what we wrote down. And they saw my paper scribbled out, and they said, well, what's happening? Why'd you scribble this out? And I said, I decided, why wouldn't I just ask them the ones, how can I love you more? What do you need more of me? What do you need less of? It's too important to guess.
Yeah.
And then they all scribbled off their names stuff too. They go, we're going to do the same thing. I go, it's too important to guess.
You have that grounded as one of your values. It just changes your trajectory of your career, but more importantly, of your personal life. Like, I don't know if my son would be here right now if I hadn't gotten more curious about his problems, because the dirty dishes on the surface for him is what I was focused on. But I had to ask what the real problem was, right? And finding out that it was tied more to addiction and mental health than dirty dishes. And it's the same thing at the workplace. I appreciate how you also weave in your daughters and your personal life and how that affects it, because when we change at work, we don't go home as another body or soul when we go home, right? So any improvements that we're doing, we're going to see benefits on both sides. And what really got me thinking differently in the book was when you talked about there's Deborah, Frito-Lay, curious young leader. And I started like that too in manufacturing because a lot of people like me, and I wasn't a process engineer, but I always enjoyed manufacturing. I grew up on a tree farm. We grew them. I got right into manufacturing. And people in manufacturing are really curious about how things work, right? And just how they're made. So, Deborah, help me understand what happens when all of a sudden we've been doing it for 20 years and I became the person that got so busy I started telling people what to do and I stopped asking. Like, what's going on there?
Well, it's called certainty, right? And in our research, so in the last year, we've been collecting data. And so now this is new research that's not in the book, is we're able to take a look at senior executives. So we are able to stratify the data. And we find as individuals become more confident, they're rising in the organization, and they become very certain of what needs to get done. And when there is that level of certainty, it narrows curiosity. Now,
Hmm.
where I try to work with leaders and say, I love that you have this incredible experience, and how do we make sure that we're not actually making mistakes because we're not looking at the system? I know you know, but what if you went into it not knowing? An example of this is in this program called Action Learning. It's like a coaching session. And I read it in this book called Action Learning. And there were a group of engineers that were in a conference room and they had their workflows all over the conference room and they had been there all day. And the boss says, I'm sorry, but we cannot leave until we figure this out. It's so critical. And so they ordered pizza, and the Domino's guys come in with a box, several boxes of pizza, and he sets it down and he's looking around the room and he says, what are you doing? And they said, well, we've got this problem. We can't solve it. Can't figure it out. We've been here all day. And then they said, hey, could we explain this to you and see what you think? Domino's pizza guy solved the problem. Now, he wasn't an engineer. He didn't know anything about that company, didn't know anything about what they were doing. Sometimes getting a fresh perspective and
Hmm.
simply asking the question, what do you see? Or what might be missing here from your perspective? And that's the power of curiosity.
Yeah, and that's the power if we want to attract, Generation Z and get people to want to work in manufacturing. I mean, that's we need that. Trevor was doing it for 20 years, lost a little bit of sight of what we were doing. Like when I started getting back on track, it was more when we started doing line side meetings. So every month we would pull in the team off a line. The engineer would show, hey, here's the data and the trends. And then I would be like, what's pissing you off or what's in your way, right? And then they would start saying, well, it's because of this or that. And that's really some of the most fun I had, right? Because now it's kind of
Mm,
like, okay, so I just became a really good facilitator. I
yeah.
didn't have to be a great, smart manufacturing dude. I just had to do a better job of connecting that top to the shop. And so that's why I think a lot of your concepts resonate with me, Deb, because I experienced it.
Yes, and so both of us have seen kind of the before and after. So you and I have both been in the certainty space, and it feels good because it feels like leadership, and we're telling people what to do. It feels
Ego.
good for our ego,
Yeah.
but if you're really committed to performance and you're really committing to creating a culture that can drive that performance, the only way through that is curiosity.
Quick break here. If you're listening to this and you're thinking about your last Kaizen event or a meeting where you gave the answer too soon, this is where it changes. If you want to get better at this, I've got something for you. When you sign up for the Manufacturing Greatness newsletter, you can download my 10 favorite questions. These are questions you can ask on the shop floor today. They can get better engagement, they can get your curiosity muscles going, and you can have more ownership from the team and something you can start right away. So go to manufacturinggreatness.com/subscribe, grab them, try them out, and let's get back to the show. Yeah, and when it comes to lean manufacturing, I mean, that's the essence of it. And I've been in plants, like I'm in plants consistently, and I've been on the shop floor where it's like, yeah, somebody from up there, pointing towards the office, made this change. And yeah, now it's disaster. So not only is the change not working well from lean manufacturing or their Kaizen, but it's actually bringing the whole line down because people are less motivated because they weren't involved. And just somehow we have such brilliant engineers that just seem to miss that connection of just bringing it in. What if you, like what you said, what if you didn't know? Because some of the world-class manufacturers I see moving senior leaders to totally different departments. And I think that may be some of the reason why they do that. Because some of them are kind of like, well, why would you move this person? They're an expert in this area. What are your thoughts on that, Deb?
Well, the thing about it is that lean was never meant to be like an event. Lean is meant to be a
Mm,
mindset of continuously challenging it and asking questions. And, you know, I, in my career, have experienced great leaders and not great leaders. And those that were not great leaders were the ones that would just tell you what to do, right? Or I say, why didn't this work? You know, this directive and telling. You know, we have done such a disservice to leaders by telling them they have to have all the answers. That is just not
mhm.
right. The best leaders have the best questions.
And when I see it in a boardroom and a general manager will ask a production manager a specific question, and then when the production manager doesn't know, there's a little bit of disappointment. And it's kind of like, do you want this person to know all the details all the time? Or do you want them to be thinking about improvements and how do they find employee engagement in manufacturing through their frontline supervisors, frontline leaders, their production supervisors? What do you want them focused on? Because if you're in the boardroom and you're asking them the details on the specifics of the manufacturing process, and we're not asking, like, how are you improving that line? Like, if I was a general manager, I'd want to know, like, how are you involving your team? How are you extracting the beautiful minds we have at this company?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, we have trained leaders to make sure they have all the answers. And the ones that are conditioning their employees to just wait to be told is just a negative environment. We
Mm,
teach people how to behave, right? And that can be in manufacturing and leadership. And it's this sense of encouraging people to ask questions, encourage people to challenge the status quo. When you see something not working or could be working better, I want you to know I'm here, I'm listening, I'm open, you matter to me.
mm, that's what we need. If we want retention in manufacturing, that's how we're going to get it. And when I think about ownership, right, and this whole thing about telling people what to do, like how do they own it? If it's just a monologue going one way, how do I think differently about it? And then if I'm just telling someone, I'm ignoring any apprehensions that they might have, like how you started the workshop with, hey, why wouldn't this work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's reminding me of I was at the dentist the other day, and in a dentist's office, you're separated by a small divider, but you can hear what's happening next to you, right? And the dentist said to this, what I could only assume was a young boy, like 7 years old or so, and she says to him, I need you to keep your hands down, your mouth open, and do not move your head, right? And he said something. I thought, wow, what if she flipped it? There are three things I need you to do. Are any of those three can you not do? Is there anything you can't do? Oh
Mm.
no, ma'am. Like I can do all three of those, right? It's like
Oh,
turning it around. Like, but when she came over to look at my teeth, I didn't have the heart to tell her. But I'm like, oh, we could be doing this better for little kids.
you can't, you see it everywhere, don't you? In the dentist office, at the grocery store, brand events, a National Speaker Association chapter events, like everywhere we go, maybe hopefully a little bit less there. But yeah, it just starts popping up everywhere. So if you were at a manufacturing plant with me and someone said, well, Deb, how do you just describe curiosity? How do you define it? How do you describe it?
It's being genuinely interested in self in others genuinely interested in self and others. So when I say self, I mean, like, sometimes I get triggered and I'll say, what's going on with you? Why is this bothering you? Right?
Asking yourself that.
Asking myself. And then when you start asking other people, now I wouldn't say to somebody, why is this bothering you? But I might say, it feels like you're unsure of this. Or, I would ask it in a way and let them talk about it. Or if you can say, you seem angry, they're going to say, oh, I'm not angry, I'm upset. At least now we're having a conversation about what I'm experiencing with them. Because
Yeah.
the only thing that really matters in the end is relationships. The relationship you have with yourself and the relationship you have with others. And how you bridge that is all in terms of how you ask questions and how you genuinely connect with them. So it is about the mind and it's about the heart. The heart is about the intention. Am I asking somebody because I genuinely want to understand them or the situation? Or am I leading the witness? Now, people often ask me, like, well, I mean, attorneys ask a lot of questions. And I said, no, attorneys ask questions that they already know the answer to. I mean, you wouldn't put somebody on a stand and you would cross-examine them that you are leading them, you're leading the witness, if you will. It's very, very different.
Great example. You're leading the witness. And how do you tell if it's a curious question or not?
I was at the bakery yesterday. I was having a cup of coffee and I was listening to a man on the phone, which assuming was his daughter. And he said something like, "You're having a good day, right?" I'm like, he's leading the witness. I don't know what was going on in the conversation, but it would be like, "Hey, how's your day going?" Or, "What's good about your day?" But I was like, "You're leading the witness," and she's just giving an answer. Yes, I'm having a good day.
Yeah, this is, in manufacturing, the manufacturing leadership will often bring people in a room after an event, right? Could be an engineering change, a shutdown, a product launch. And we'll kind of do a lessons learned. And I can see how going into that meeting, checking in with yourself, being curious about the people coming into that and having a little empathy of, what was it like to go through that engineering change? And, how can we not lead them to what we let go of the certainty, have an idea before going into that debrief, and then just sitting in that space and just working hard to reserve what we think went well or what didn't go well with that engineering change. This is gold, Deb. I can just see this, someone applying this tomorrow.
It's a curiosity, it's a luxury, it's a nice to have. I have data that demonstrates that curiosity drives performance. And that's when I begin to get CEOs to stand up and say, "Tell me more." I said, "This is not a nice to have, it's an imperative. It will provide you with a strategic advantage if you implement this within your organization." And then they say, "Let's go. How do we do it?"
Yeah, and I can see that connection. I think you articulate that really well, is that we see the statistics on employee engagement, and you had some numbers in there. I usually use the percentage disengaged or engaged. You use financial numbers.
Yes.
And I forget the numbers offhand. I can put them in the show notes, but it was a lot of money. This doesn't cost any capital. You just
Oh.
need to shift how you're showing up as the leader, have more questions, be more curious, take just a little bit of time up front, and it's going to pay you dividends over and over and over again.
And as I had said earlier, have done a disservice to leaders in telling them they need to have all the answers. So this is a typical scenario that I experienced in my 4 decades in corporate America. So you have a leader in their office, an employee comes in, they put the problem on the table. Here's the problem. So the leader looks at the problem, the employee looks at the problem, and the leader thinks, well, I know how to solve this. And so for efficiency's sake, they go ahead and solve it and they send the employee on their way. Right?
Yes, I see it.
But a thoughtful leader and a leader that's playing the long game, the employee brings the problem and they set it on the table, and the leader asks the employee questions about the problem. How have you thought about solving it? Have you solved something like this that's similar, right? So what you're doing here is you're building the confidence of that employee that they can solve this problem. And
Mhm.
wait, my leader thinks that I have the ability to solve this problem, and he's supporting me or she's supporting me, but they believe in me. So great leaders are playing the long game. The short game is, I'm going to go tell you what to do, and then you're off and you're gone. And then in another month, they come back with another problem and you're in the same situation. So, leaders that are listening to me out there, is you focus on the employee, not the problem.
And sometimes, I've heard focus on the problem, not the person, because that we think of that in regards to blame. But if we're truly being curious, we want to know more about the person, not the problem, because the
That's right.
person is going to have that information. And we have great leadership development in manufacturing. I mean, there is millions of dollars spent on all this training. I don't see it transferring to the day-to-day behaviors. In particular, when we have the stress of the behind on tasks and then in relentless amount of meetings and trying to be on the shop floor, when that teammate does come with that question, I'm feeling the pressure. I know the answer. I should ask him a couple questions, but I got to move on to the next thing. What's your advice for that when we're in that moment?
You know, I work with leaders and I share with them that when somebody comes to you with an answer, or you're in a team meeting and with a question, and they come in with a question, I want you to say first and foremost, I don't know.
Mm,
Pause. I don't know. Let's explore it. I might have some ideas, but I need to hear more information from you. Leaders get comfortable saying, I don't know, because you're modeling vulnerability. You're
yeah.
modeling that you're open to explore.
I don't know. Let's explore that. Like just program that in the back of your mind right now. Even if you're driving, say it 3 times. And then just remember that today if you're going into the plant.
Yeah.
Oh,
Here's another one. I use this with my grandchildren. I have one that's almost 4. Yesterday, I asked him a question and he said, I don't know. And I paused and I said, if you did know, what would you know? And he goes, I would know my helmet's in the garage. Oh, let's go check in the garage. In the sense of prompting it, let's go one step further. What would you know?
yeah. Yeah. It,
Now,
it's
I
like,
don't know that I would do that in a corporate environment, but for him, I knew he knew, but for whatever reason, his confidence wasn't there to say, it's in the garage.
it's it's like going to the gym though. Like you got to practice this a little bit every day. And I think that's what's going to make the difference for the manufacturing industry and adjacent industries like construction and logistics, transportation. I see the same challenges. That's what I'm writing my book for. And it was a good inspiration reading your book as I'm writing mine. And for our listeners, they're going to want to know more. We'll leave a link in the show notes to purchase your book. How does our community best follow you?
Yes, you can follow me on my website. I have lots of other materials on there. You can actually take the curiosity curve assessment. So if you want to understand your current level of curiosity, there's a complimentary assessment on there. And you can find me at Debra, Debra Clary, CLARY.com. Also follow me on LinkedIn. I post a couple times per week some nuggets about curiosity and what's happening in the world.
Awesome. This has been fun. You've challenged me to think a little bit deeper on curiosity, which I was already focused, like my saying a lot of times when I sign off is like, be curious. But you've taken that to another level for me. So thank you. Thank you for doing what you do and having a long history of being curious and consistent and for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm guessing you're a little more curious after listening to this episode. And hey, if your lean efforts aren't working the way you want them to, it's probably not the process, it's the questions. So, because continuous improvement was never meant to be an event, it's just how we work. It's a mindset, it's a behavior practice, and it's how you show up. So, if you want to lead that way, go to manufacturinggreatness.com/subscribe, get those 2 questions, start asking them on your next walk or your next meeting or your next Kaizen. And that's how it's actually going to stick. And thank you for listening to the show.